This podcast, including all discussions and examples, is for informational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency or company. Today, we sit down with Dan Cnossen as we discuss his transition from a decorated Navy SEAL to a United States Paralympic medalist. This is From the Dive Shop.
Welcome to a very special edition of From the Dive Shop. I am Jen Edwards, coming to you from San Diego, California, where ADS is holding our annual Warrior Expo West. And I am thrilled to introduce our guest speaker and good friend, Dan Cnossen. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jen.
Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. Dan is a decorated Navy SEAL. He is a Paralympian. He has multiple graduate degrees from Harvard. This guy is a magician, and I'm so excited to hear your story today.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's great to be with you.
So you've done all these really cool, amazing things. I would love to hear, what's something that you've done, either in your military career or since your military career that's incredibly special and unique that you've gotten to do?
Well, I've been able to do a lot of amazing things after my injury, mainly thanks to the Paralympic program that I've been a part of since 2 years after my military injury. But one of the most remarkable things that I was able to do actually happened about 9 months ago from the date of this recording. I was, as a previously sponsored athlete by Delta Airlines, in communication with Delta Airlines. They were partnering with an organization, a nonprofit, actually out of here in San Diego, called the Best Defense Foundation, to do a battlefield return for the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Oh, wow.
And we had a contingent of about 36 World War II veterans, the youngest being 97 and the oldest 104, going out to Normandy. And Delta Airlines provided a charter plane. Best Defense Foundation provided one-on-one caregivers for the World War II veterans, and we did a variety of battlefield visits and ceremonies. For me, it was remarkable. I had not been to the American cemetery or the landing sites of Normandy to see all that. I had been reading about World War II just to brush up on my history, so it was extra special to be around the World War II veterans, to hear their stories, knowing that for not much longer we're going to hear their stories firsthand like that. I don't consider myself much of a crier, but I found myself crying and tearing up quite a bit during that trip. It was remarkable, an honor for me to be on it. I'll never forget it.
That's amazing. That's just really something unique that probably most people would never even have the opportunity to do. So obviously you were a Navy SEAL and had a pretty intense career and an injury. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us? Can you tell us a little about your story?
Sure. Well, I could say I grew up in Kansas, and so for someone who grew up on a fifth-generation family farm and who was borderline scared of the water, to go on and become a SEAL, for me was a big accomplishment, even just to get to the front door of BUDS, which is Basic Underwater Demolition School, was a big accomplishment because I had gone to the Naval Academy. I don't know why in high school I settled on, I want to go to the Naval Academy. But part of it had to do with I wanted to be a Marine. I was interested in the SEAL program. The Naval Academy seemed like the logical place to go. I wanted to continue my education to get a college degree. So I found myself in Annapolis, Maryland. And then my circle of friends really were people who wanted to be selected for the SEAL program. And I just knew that this was the right thing for me based on my personality, my interests, and I had to get to work. I had to get better at swimming and get more comfortable in the water because that was my big challenge.
It's amazing to me. I have a couple of friends who are Navy SEALs or former or retired Navy SEAls that weren't great swimmers, that it seems like despite the fact that that's so critical to the process, there are some guys that are like, I'm going to do this no matter what, even though I'm not a great swimmer.
Well, I can be a case study in that because most of the swimming, the actual swimming for travel that you do in SEAL training or in BUDS is with fins on, and I could fin pretty well. But swimming without fins wasn't as good at, but you do need to be comfortable in the water. Right. That is the most important thing, just to get that comfortability, which for me was a big challenge. But now, I mean, it's been years since I've been through that training, and I just love the water. And a lot of it has to do with my injury because swimming is the one thing that I can do now where I don't need a prosthetic. I don't need an adaptive sport device. I can just be immersed in the water, weightless, in my own body, maybe a dive mask or goggles or a snorkel, but I mean, I can just have that mobility and feel like I'm floating. And it's really, really quite nice for me now.
So talking about your injury, you had multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you mind telling the story of your injury?
Sure. Yes, I had gone through BUD/S in 2002, graduated in 2003. I should probably say that in my senior year at the Naval Academy, 9/11 happened. And so I knew that the decision to go into this career field would be consequential, but I wanted to do it for that reason even more because of what had happened in September 2001. So I showed up in California in the summer of 2002, went through the training, was assigned to a West Coast team in the fall of 2003 after getting through all of the basic and intermediary training. I started doing the deployment workup cycle, and by the time 2008 came around, I was a platoon commander now. And in the course of my platoon commander deployment, this happened. But it's also important, I think, to say that this happened on a turnover operation, which is sort of a phased approach for one platoon to relieve another platoon, or in this case, two platoons to relieve two platoons. And the majority of my platoon mates were still back here in San Diego waiting to do the phased deployment. I had gone out early because that's what leaders do. They go out early so that you can get the lay of the land and be ready for when the rest of the team arrives. You can be in a position of having a bit more experience on the ground. And the very first operation of this phased sequential turnover was the operation that I got injured on. And without going into too many specifics, I can say it was a target assault. It was at night. I was part of a smaller team that was establishing an overwatch position that would overlook a target compound that would later be assaulted. And as we were clearing that hilltop, I stepped on an explosive device that was buried underground, went off. I didn't hear anything. I just saw a flash of light under my night vision goggles. I was on the ground. Really, the main theme here is the response of my teammates. When I say teammates, most of them were not members of my immediate platoon because this was a turnover operation. Right. So in some cases I knew people. In one case I knew someone really well. He was just in the other platoon, but I just knew him from before. And in some cases these were strangers, but they were responding to save me. And I had a double femoral artery bleed. They had to put on tourniquets. And this is serious. And this shows the importance of training and realistic training. And we were now compromised. They have to get me off of this hilltop. And in order to do so, we have to avoid what are likely, and indeed there were additional buried explosive devices. We had an explosive ordnance disposal technician up there. I should say that, I was incapacitated, but all of my teammates who responded on that hilltop, they all got the Silver Star, which is the nation's third highest medal for valor. I say that because I don't know how to otherwise describe their action, the valor that they had, the selflessness. These are sons, in many cases, husbands and fathers. They have a lot to get home to, but they're putting their life on the line to try to save me.
And in reading your bio, that was no small feat. I know the way it read, you had 6 different tourniquets. And
6 tourniquets.
And they had to carry you down the mountain.
It was more of a drag. They initially started to, I think, pick me up, if I remember correctly, and I believe I do, because they were tripping and stumbling, and it was kind of falling, and it was sharp, craggy rocks that were cutting into me. What I remember was the medic who literally saved my life, telling me to stay awake, hang in there. And that's what I held on to. And for them, it was no easy task. In addition to the danger that I described, they also had to endure a lot of their own physical pain and suffering because they're in their full kit. They have their weapon. They have to provide security. Dragging me was no easy task. And there was a helicopter coming back to get me up, but time and fuel were getting way too short. And they eventually got me onto the helicopter within 1 minute of bingo fuel, which means it's going without me because it wouldn't get back to the point of origin. So it was that close. So much had to line up and so much depended upon prior planning, training, preparation, and then that response.
It was that your worst day, everything had to go right for you to survive.
Everything had to go absolutely correct. If the helicopter was 5 minutes later, maybe I wanted to make it. If I was 5 minutes later getting down to the helicopter landing zone and it had to turn around, I wouldn't have made it. So first and foremost though, it depended upon the guys that were up on that hilltop.
Wow, that's amazing. So from that point, again, doing some research, you've been through 40 surgeries.
I didn't count.
Someone did.
Apparently, I know it's been over 3 dozen, and it started right off the bat. I remember getting dragged onto the helicopter. I let myself go, or maybe I was put under, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital room, and I was apparently back in the United States. It turns out I was back at Bethesda Naval Hospital. My mother was in the room there with me, and I had been operated on in Kandahar, at Bagram, in Landstuhl in Germany. I'd been flown back to Andrews Air Force Base. Now I'm in the ICU. My routine was surgery on Monday, on Wednesday, on Friday, week after week. And there was one week I remember they had to do a Thursday surgery. It was at least 20 hours a week of surgery time. Typically more like probably 30 hours, because these were 7 to 10 hour plus surgeries, complicated.
So clearly up to this point, I mean, you've had a life of a tenacious driven person. You went to the Naval Academy, you made it through BUDS, you rose in the ranks, and you survived these surgeries. Where's your head during that period of time? Well,
where my head was, okay, so I was going through surgery. I wasn't sleeping well. When I could sleep, I had vicious nightmares because of the opioid that I was on, the painkiller. It was so strong. It combined with a burning fever that I had. I mean, burning. And they thought it was from infection. I mean, I'd been dragged for, I don't know how long that dragged. I mean, time, getting dragged off of that hill, time had no sense of flow to it. I had no idea how long that took. It seemed like it took forever, but getting dragged through that with open wounds, I mean, how could you not get infected? But they couldn't identify what it was. And so for weeks I wasn't responding, and I just had this awful fever. And I mean, people had to wear winter coats in my ICU room. They had it, and yet I was still sweating, and I was shirtless in there. And so facing the night was very difficult. And these nightmares were awful, and they were as real as you and I talking right now on this podcast. I remember one of the nightmares, the members of my platoon, to a person on a flight line, were lined up calling me a coward for not being on the deployment with them. As much as I was going through medically, the worst thing, the most corrosive thing, was being stuck in that ICU bed while they were on the deployment, going on operations. I'm not sharing the risk. And that feeling of disconnect just was awful mentally.
Wow. So when did you turn the corner? Just for anybody that doesn't know, if I haven't said this, you have 7 Paralympic medals. So there came a point where things got better, and you used that tenacity and that drive and that, whatever that internal power is that you have to push through. When did things start to get better, and when did you start thinking about being an Olympian?
Well, not for a while. In the beginning, it was just survival. I did learn, not that I was telling myself this at the time, but I think it does come to people who go through, as an example, in my own training, Hell Week, but in other military trainings, there's kind of selection weeks or crucibles that you have to get through. You learn how to process time, and you have maybe a goal that's long range, but in order to get through this right here, you have to kind of shorten your focus, because if you're thinking about the long term, that can really break you down mentally. Mm-hmm. It can be overwhelming. And for me, I had some goals that started to form. Initially, it was get back into the community and be operational. That was delusional. And I realized at some point that that's just not realistic. A goal should be realistic, but it also should be meaningful. So I started to think, well, I want to walk. That's my goal. I want to walk because really I want to run. And I want to run, but before you do that, you probably should walk. So I should focus on walking. Let's do the physical therapy. And I had to get over to Walter Reed. I was at Bethesda, but Walter Reed was the Army hospital in DC. They've since combined, but back then they were separate. And when I got over to Walter Reed, I was surrounded by just probably the low hundreds of military amputees. And some of these individuals were triple or quadruple amputees, clearly having it worse. And in some cases, they were 18 or 19-year-old kids, a lot younger than I was at the time. And that relative immaturity seemed really difficult. And I knew that there were those who've been blinded or severely burned, or those who are not with us, that their families would give anything for their loved one to be in this situation, just missing 2 legs. I started to have what I would call a shift in the way that I looked at my situation, a shift in the perspective of it. And there's a lot of different ways to look at an event, whether it's in your past or the present or the way you look into the future. Sure. There's a lot of different angles. But I started to, over time, start to think I'm actually pretty lucky, because this could have been worse for everything we just talked about. Sure. Everything had to work out perfectly for me to be here. And when I could look at the situation and the events that surrounded my injury and look at my injury in a new way, I could start to have kind of, I would say, a mindset shift, and I could start to think to the future with positivity. And I started to develop some new goals. And it was simply at first to pursue the Paralympic team. And I didn't know which sport, but I had a background in endurance sports, and I went out to San Diego here. And again, I keep coming back to San Diego, but I came out here not really for any purpose other than for a trip to San Diego, but it was actually a Paralympic recruitment camp. And lo and behold, in San Diego, not exactly the winter sports mecca, the cross-country coach happened to be here, and biathlon coach. And biathlon is, well, I thought it was running and swimming, but it's actually cross-country skiing with target shooting. And those 2 coaches were here. And they invited me to a sports camp on snow later in that year, but early in the winter season, so it would be late November, and it's going to be in West Yellowstone, Montana. And I went out there. They put me on a sit ski, which is a chair, basically, or a seat on 2 cross-country skis. I'm in the woods. I love hiking, the mobility of it, the glide, the adverse conditions. It was dumping snow. I could see these people who would later be my future teammates, but zipping by on the snow. And I thought, this is what I'm doing. And I just knew that that's... So at this fundamental level, cross-country skiing for me was a way to be a part of a team, to train, to set new goals, to see progress, to be part of this team, to put the training to the test overseas, and hopefully maybe represent Team USA at the Paralympic Winter Games. And I got to do that in 2014. And I got to do it again in 2018. And I got to do it again most recently in 2022.
That's incredible. I can't ski very well, and giving me with 2 legs, skis and a gun, real bad idea. Just a real bad idea all the way across the board. So,
well, cross-country skiing is not downhill skiing. A lot of Americans, I think skiing is, they associate it with downhill, like taking the lift up and going down at 70 miles an hour. Cross-country skiing is uphill and then down the hill that you just climbed. It's around a turn. It's up a hill again. It's an endurance sport, typically going from 1 kilometer, which would be more of a sprint, even though that might still take 3 minutes, up to 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. The long is 50 plus kilometers. In the Paralympics, we don't do 50 plus kilometers, but we'll do 20K races. And so it's an endurance sport. There's a lot of training. Even when there's no snow, you're still doing the training so that you're ready for the snow season. And I like it. It's ultimately a sport that's about confronting pain and suffering, because you have to dig deep in order to be competitive. And that's painful, but you start to learn about how to pace yourself. You learn about how to approach the pain and really get into it. And I think ultimately you just have to dig deep and suffer to do well.
It's just incredible to hear about the mental toughness you've put out into the world throughout your career. So switching gears a little bit, again, some of the research I did on you, you have advanced degrees from Harvard in public policy and also divinity. Come on, walk me through.
How did that happen? Where did that happen? Yeah, I was getting out of the Navy. I had done, and to the credit of the Naval Special Warfare community, they supported me. The admiral at the time, he was all for me training, and it's what I wanted to do. I didn't even want, I'd been exposed to a little bit of racing while I was still at the end of my time at Walter Reed. And I did 2 years of inpatient, outpatient, physical therapy, like surgery, all of that. Like my whole hospital time was a couple weeks shy of exactly 2 years. But I knew that this was the direction I wanted to go, and I didn't want to lose 6-10 months, however long it would take to actually get out of the Navy, because I was so obsessed with, I want to make the team for 2014 in the Sochi, Russia Paralympic Winter Games. That was my goal. And so I was going to, the community was going to support me so I could be on active duty going to the Paralympic Winter Games. And that was very meaningful. It had another side to it, which I can get in later, because it put a lot of pressure on me because I was on active duty and I thought I need to go win a medal. But in the short term, I got to move out to Colorado. I took orders with an Army Special Forces unit out of Colorado Springs. But in reality, I was living up in Winter Park and training for the sport. And it kind of was like a rocky setup because I was renting the corner unit of a barn and training in the snow. And it felt good to train for something. I mean, it really felt like I now have a sense of purpose and direction, and I could transfer everything that I've been doing, because honestly, I'm thinking to myself, what else can I do? The rest of the world is going to see this disability. The jobs that I want to do that would be action, well, I can't do those anymore because I realistically, I'm disabled, but I would be a support person. But I always wanted to be kind of at the front edge of the action. And so this is the one thing I can think of where I actually have the support of a team, a coach, you have a program director, you have a nutritionist, physiologist, strength and conditioning coach, you have wax technicians, you have the country behind you cheering you, so that you can go out and do your job. And that to me was a very special thing. It motivated me. It gave me a sense of purpose and direction.
Wow. So back to the education side.
Oh, I forgot about that.
No, that's
part.
okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
But I got out of the Navy in 2014, and I thought I had some friends who had gone to the Kennedy School in Boston. And so I applied and got in, and I thought 1 year and done and get back to training. And that year I devoted primarily to school. But along the way, I realized I really liked being a student, and I had a good setup, and I was in an area in New England where I could continue training. So I applied to the Divinity School 2-year program, and really, really liked that program academically. But I needed to step up the training. I was not so much a student athlete as an athlete student, I think, priority wise. But I didn't want my classmates to know that because I felt insecure. Because in that environment, graduate students aren't competing in higher performing sports. It's just not a thing. So I thought in my own insecurity that they would think less of me if they thought I was, but I was very, disciplined, just like I learned at the Naval Academy. Lights out at 9:30, get plenty of sleep, train in the morning, and then you're in class and studying the rest of the day. With proper time management, it was good. And I also think that it helped me because I wasn't thinking, because of classes, I'm not thinking as much about the pressure of competition. When you are a full-time athlete, it's sort of an athlete's dream to just be full-time. But with that comes a lot of pressure because you're devoting your whole life to this, so I better be getting good results, that kind of mentality. Whereas now I was like, well, nobody expects me to do anything. I can't go to half the competitions because I'm in class. And so it took the edge off of the pressure.
I know I read that one of the things that you ran into initially was that you overtrained.
Yes.
Can you talk a little about what that means, what that looks like?
Yeah. When I'm skiing, I'm in a seated position, as I said, and it's double pulling with the arms. And I think my background as an athlete was on the triathlon team at the Naval Academy, where it's leg based and you can do a lot more hours. When it's arm based, you can't do as many hours, but still cross country skiing is a non-impact sport. You can put in a lot of hours. But I thought in my arrogance, when I was a young athlete, if I just, when I was living in Colorado in the early stages, if I put in twice the work, I'll get twice as fast. This is the training plan. I'm going to increase it by 50% on top of what it already is. So I was doing these workouts, not logging them, so the coaches didn't know that I was doing, just now this stuff that it just was not intelligent. But
sneaky extra workouts. You're not going to see me do that.
And I put a lot of pressure on myself because I was on active duty. So I showed up at the Sochi Paralympics in 2014, and the Paralympics follow the Olympics. Probably overtrained, not running totally on full cylinders, I think. But either way, I was a newer athlete. It was very beneficial to just get that experience and kind of reduce the pressure so that the next one I could show up and be ready to go. And had I been fully trained in Sochi or fully recovered from the excessive amount of training that I had done, I don't think anything was going to happen. The Russians were they were pretty hard to go against on that games for reasons that we can get into in another conversation.
I'm just enjoying the fact that you needed something to distract yourself from your Olympic training, so you thought that you'd get some graduate degrees from Harvard, like one does. I mean, that's obviously perfectly normal.
Well, the programs, I happen to be a big reader, and the programs were primarily read and then, write something based on your reading. And it wasn't like I was going to labs and do, I'm more of a humanity.
Go ahead and underplay those Harvard graduate degrees. It's perfectly acceptable. Yeah, this is amazing. So again, we've talked about the fact that you've just had this storied experience in what could have been a tragic end. Feels like it's the beginning, that you've just done so many incredible, amazing things so far. And now you're doing speaking as well, right? How long have you been doing that?
I was approached by an agency to represent me. I certainly was not ever going to seek that out in 2019. And in 2018 approach, but my first engagement in front of an audience was in March of 2019.
Okay.
So the time of this, that's 6 years ago.
Well, I'm excited that I get to see you speak tomorrow, but a lot of the people that watch the podcast and see this won't have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. What's your main message? What's the theme? What is the takeaway that people should have from all the things you've accomplished and achieved? And survived?
Well, thank you. I wasn't setting out to achieve things. I was setting out to do what I wanted to do, and maybe it looks like I was setting out to achieve things, but I didn't get into cross country skiing honestly to win the medals. And you get into it, and you would hope that can happen, but that's not why I got into it. I didn't go to school to check a box, but I wanted to learn more. So doing something I think for me, it's the real reason, not the end result, is important. And in sports, it's doing it for the work and the process, because what I learned was you could 4 years of training and focus and thinking about it for this 2-week blip, and it goes by so fast that you better like the work and the training and the intervals and the strength and conditioning. You better like all of that, because that's actually what it's really about. That's 99.8% of the time spent is just preparing and training, and so you have to like that.
You got to enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah.
You have to enjoy the getting there, because once you get there, it's done.
I know, it's over. And you kind of can feel like you've just gone off a cliff. Like, okay, well, 4 more years, or maybe, what am I going to do? But I forget, what was the original question?
I have no idea.
I went off a tangent.
I thoroughly enjoyed the tangent, so let's just keep following it.
Yeah.
So the 2026 games are coming.
Yes.
Will you be competing in those?
I'm planning on it. Yeah, I'm training. I've retired from biathlon. I'm just focusing on cross-country skiing. With that is probably a big reduction in my chance to get a medal, but I'm okay with that. I'm just okay with this being I'm training hard for cross-country skiing. I'm going to be in my middle 40s competing in my last Paralympics likely. And so that's just the reality of the situation. And I could have called it 3 years ago, but I still like racing. I still like skiing. And so some people say go out when you're on top, but that would have been 6-7 years ago, and I wasn't ready. So I think it's going out when you're ready to go out, and going out as a good ambassador, hopefully. And a medal, a gold medal, a silver medal, it doesn't by itself mean anything. It's about what you can do with it after.
Great.
Could you go to schools, show kids, talk about your story? I mean, that's being an ambassador.
That's awesome. So obviously near term 2026 Paralympics, broadly looking at the fact that this may be your last Olympics, what's next for you?
Well, I am focused on preparation. I have just shy of a year to prepare for the 2026 Paralympic Winter Games, which will be following the Olympics in Milan Cortina. They're calling it Milan Cortina. The cross-country racing component will be in Val di Fiemme, Italy. So that's going to be fun. After that, well, I've been involved in public speaking. I kind of want to see where that goes. I'll have more time to do it. Mm-hmm. I would like to be involved in a nonprofit that I've been associated with, but even more so, able to go to the camps.
Do you want to plug your nonprofit?
Sure, absolutely. Yes. I did plug the Best Defense Foundation, which is awesome. with the battlefield returns, not just for World War II veterans, but also for veterans of other conflicts. But the nonprofit that I'm on the board of now, started by my friend and classmate from the Naval Academy, Nathan Schmidt, who is a Marine, is called the Mountain Seed Foundation. And we run healing and therapy camps centered around arduous, difficult mountaineering, and currently in Austria, but for Ukrainians who have been injured, like I have been, or widows who have lost their spouse and their children. And so these camps currently being held in Austria will be held inside Ukraine. We, for the last year, have been developing climbing routes and developing a retreat center. We had the groundbreaking coming up in May 2025. So that has been very, very rewarding for me, because I think we have a really great team, not just of U.S. military veterans, but also climbers and guides, and also psychologists. And so it's not just climbing, but it's climbing and then unpacking the lessons that you're learning from the climbing. And it's all centered around positive psychology.
Excellent. Extraordinary.
The credit goes to my friend and classmate Nathan for starting this.
Well, Dan Cnossen, you are a treat to talk to. I can't wait to hear you speak during Warrior West tomorrow. And just thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to have this conversation.
All right. Yeah. This has been From the Dive Shop. See you next time.